2022 seems to be starting right where 2021 left off. Now we have Prime Minister Justin Trudeau coming out with comments calling people who are unvaccinated racists and misogynists, people who don't believe in science. And then his health minister, Mr. Duclos, saying that it's time for compulsory vaccination. So I'm going to take a look at these, frankly, insane pronouncements today on Don't Talk TV. Hello, my name is Nicholas Wansbutter. I'm a lawyer in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, and welcome to Don't Talk TV. Now, just to warn you at the outset of this video, it's probably not going to be up to my usual standards. Thanks to Build Back Better, my laptop has been in the shop for 2 weeks and it's still there, so I can't do all the screen sharing and screenshots that I like to normally do to back up what I'm saying. My volunteer media assistant, Richard Mitchell, is going to do the best he can with his editing, but it's not the same when a different person is trying to, after the fact, add screenshots versus the person who's actually doing it at the same time. I'm also a little bit under the weather, so maybe not as full of fire as I'd like to be for these absolutely outrageous topics that I'll be talking about, but we'll do the best we can. So as I said in the preamble, I want to talk about two things, and these are things that I've been getting all kinds of questions about in the comment box. Firstly, comments made by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau calling people who are unvaccinated racist, misogynist, people who are taking up room that we shouldn't tolerate. And then Health Minister Mr. Duclos saying that the time has come for compulsory vaccination. Although in typical Liberal Party style, he passes the buck onto the provinces. And then Quebec, unsurprisingly, were the first ones to take up the challenge. And they're now imposing a health contribution tax on the unvaccinated, which is very interesting. How come there's no health contribution tax to the morbidly obese, or to people who smoke 5 packs a day, or people who pound a 40 of whiskey every day? No, only unvaccinated. That's the only unhealthy people in Canada in 2022. So let's take a look first at what Mr. Trudeau said. So just play a quick clip to see his nefarious comments, and then we'll talk about them.
Oui, on va s'en sortir de cette pandémie par la vaccination. Puis on en connaît tous des gens qui sont en train d'hésiter un petit peu. On va continuer d'essayer de les convaincre. Mais il y a aussi des gens qui sont farouchement opposés à la vaccination.
Qui sont extrémistes.
Qui croient pas dans la science, qui sont souvent misogynes, souvent racistes aussi. C'est un petit groupe, mais qui prend de la place. Et là, il faut faire un choix en tant que leader, en tant que pays. Est-ce qu'on tolère ces gens-là ou est-ce qu'on dit, ben voyons, la plupart des gens, presque 80% des Québécois ont fait ce qu'il fallait faire, se sont fait vacciner, on veut revenir aux choses qu'on aime faire. C'est pas ces gens-là qui vont nous bloquer maintenant.
So a lot of people have been emailing me and putting comments in the comments box saying, oh no, he should be criminally charged. Well, here's an unpopular opinion, and it's based upon my almost 20 years of experience as a criminal lawyer. What he said isn't criminal. It's morally reprehensible. It's outrageous. It's the type of commentary that a prime minister who's supposed to represent and look after the interests of all Canadians should absolutely not be saying. It's the sort of thing that the media should be ripping him apart for, but because he's Team Red, the media is good with it. But let me focus on the criminal. My least watched video of all time is a detailed analysis I did in episode 16 of Canada's hate crime laws. So have a watch of that episode. I'm linking it in the show description below. That will give you a clear understanding of how Canada's hate crime laws work and why, although morally reprehensible, these comments are not criminal. Just one point I'd stress on that is that the definition for an identifiable group, and you're only criminally potentially liable for inciting hatred against an identifiable group as defined by the Criminal Code, Section 318 sub 4 lays out the definition that applies to both 318 and 319. So that definition is, in this section, identifiable group means any section of the public distinguished by color, race, religion, national or ethnic origin, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or mental or physical disability. There's just simply no way to shoehorn people who make certain medical decisions into any of those categories. So Section 319 of the Criminal Code of Canada just simply doesn't apply on that basis alone. But again, if you go to episode 16, I think you'll see why it doesn't rise to the level of criminal inciting of hatred either. Now, people asking or wanting criminal charges to be brought against Mr. Trudeau brings me back to one of my comments in episode 84, and feel free to watch that again. And that was my view that people are too reliant on government and they think that government is going to save them. The government is not going to save you. Therefore, seeking out criminal charges is just the wrong way to go in my view. The real problem is that the vast majority of Canadians either don't care or are in favor of these comments. So criminal charge isn't going to accomplish anything. We need to win hearts and minds, to use a phrase that's been used a lot in the media. We need to show people, look, this is what our Prime Minister is saying. This is why this is terrible. You might not agree with the medical choices being made by certain people, but how can we have a country where there's this sort of division being fomented by the ostensible leader? We need to go on our own public relations campaign, in my view. On to topic number 2, compulsory vaccinations being advocated by the health minister. So I have here a CBC News article from January the 7th, and it's entitled, "Provinces Could Make Vaccination Mandatory, Says Federal Health Minister." And it says here, provinces are likely to introduce mandatory vaccination policies in the coming months to deal with surging COVID-19 caseloads, Health Minister Jean-Yves Duclos said today. What we see now is that our healthcare system in Canada is fragile. Our people are tired, and the only way that we know to get through COVID-19, this variant, and any future variant is through vaccination, Duclos said. Now, setting aside scientific arguments or pointing out the fact that as of today in Ontario, more than half of the people in hospital and more than half of the people in ICU are fully vaccinated, and also that COVID-19 ICU cases are only 16% of the ICU caseload in all of Ontario, meaning that unvaccinated people are about 7% of who's in ICU. Setting that aside, the concept of compulsory/mandatory vaccination is absolutely abhorrent and foreign to Canadian law. Have a look at episode 57. I lay out the details there in more detail rather than reinventing the wheel. I think it's good to revisit that episode. I referenced some Supreme Court case law and a 1996 Canada Communicable Diseases report where it's clearly stated that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms makes it impossible to have mandatory vaccinations, at least legally, in Canada. Now, as I suggest in episode 57, this is clearly and blatantly illegal. We know it's illegal. They know it's illegal. Everyone knows it's illegal. Our government just doesn't care. It will be challenged in courts. I hope that eventually the Supreme Court of Canada would do the right thing and strike this down. But as I've said, again, that's what we can't rely on the government to come and be our saviors here. I mean, first of all, why would you expect the people who are doing this to us to be the ones who are going to save us from what they're doing? But also, it's going to take so long to get to court. Now, I mean, I could yell all day about what's so outrageous about this. I mean, this is scapegoating at its most odious. This is the next level of division, of trying to tear our country apart, of pitting neighbor against neighbor and family member against family member. And it's coming from the same people, the same part of the political spectrum that says that mandatory minimum sentences for murderers, gang members, people with that use firearms in the commission of offenses, they say that those mandatory minimums are terrible. Those criminals deserve more rights. But if you're a plague rat who hasn't been vaccinated, you should be forced. I hope you can see the disconnect, the inconsistency, and the craziness of this. And I don't see how it's even based on science when you can see how many vaccinated people are getting sick. And this is in a context where the unvaccinated aren't allowed to go anywhere. So how can unvaccinated be used as scapegoats when they can't go to restaurants, they can't go to sporting events, they can't go to cinemas, they can't travel? who is doing all these things? Who is spreading this? Obviously, it's people who've been fully vaccinated. So the division seems entirely unwarranted. That's why I say it's scapegoating at its most odious. So again, I hearken back to episode 84 on what we can do about it. I laid out 3 things that I think are very important for people to do, and I encourage you to watch that episode again. But just as a final note, I would add to that I think the best way to fight against this is do not give up. Do not give in to these bullies. Do not give in to the coercion. Unfortunately, I quite sadly hear from a lot of people who say, well, I was scared of losing my job, so I gave in. Well, I have sympathy for people who are in a situation like that. You have to think about the long-term consequences, what you're doing to everyone else, what you're doing to your children and to society. You're helping to forge a totalitarian Canada by giving into this. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be painful, but it's the only way I can see for us to get out of this. We're not going to comply our way out of this. We're going to resist our way out of it. You know, and I mentioned Richard, my social media and PR expert. I mean, he's lost his education because he stood for principle. And in making that self-sacrifice, he has struck a blow for freedom. His fiancée has lost her job at Grand River Hospital. She was even interviewed on CTV. That's painful, but she has struck a blow for freedom and has fought for her children in doing that. And so I just give these as a couple of examples of people who, you know, are accepting the burdens, but knowing it's because it's for a better purpose and for a brighter future. So I strongly encourage everyone to do that and talk to each other. There's so much support out there. And from a legal perspective, if you give in and get the vaccine, you've just completely cut the legs out from under yourself to try seeking any legal recourse. It's a little bit akin to an individual who pleads guilty and then thinks better of it later and wants to have their guilty plea overturned. Yes, it can be done, but it's extremely difficult. So I encourage everyone to hold the line. And I think that we may be getting closer to the end than we think. As the tyranny is ramping up, this seems to me to be a sign of panic on the part of those above us. And they're lashing out and attacking certain groups and trying to foment more division because their narrative may be starting to fall apart, and they can see that. They talk about Canadians being tired and upset. Maybe it's because Canadians are getting tired and upset with them. Canadians were promised, if you just comply a bit more, Canadians are promised that if you take these jabs, this will all be over. You can have your lives back. And here we are, right back to the way things were in March 2020 almost. And again, the unvaccinated didn't do this. The government did it. And I hope if you're a fully vaccinated person that you see this video and you don't give in to this division and scapegoating. We need to all work together. I have no problem with anyone making their own medical decisions. Everyone should be allowed to make their own personal choice. That's all that we're talking about here. And the type of Canada where people don't have personal autonomy, don't have the ability to choose what medical procedures they take, is a Canada where there's really no freedom at all. So this video isn't legal advice. If you need legal advice, you can contact another lawyer or myself. My 1-855 number is listed below. I am in a position to start taking new clients again, and my practice insurance has finally been updated, so I can start looking into taking non-criminal cases as well. If you have show topics you'd like to see me cover, please send an email to the email address listed below, or leave a comment in the comment section. And if you found this video at all interesting, helpful, or informative, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, and following us on social media.